Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. My name is Bliss Foster. Welcome back to the Margiela series, where we are exploring every single runway show that Martin Margiela produced at his eponymous house. We find ourselves in spring-summer 2002. Spring-summer 2002, buckle in. Okay, so I pulled a muscle yesterday and it hurts really bad, and we have a lot to get through here. I don't know if you could see that or not. There was a lot. So I'm going to try to stay enthusiastic while my neck is in pain. So Martin and the crew are back to doing unorthodox presentations. We return to the short film in a showroom format. So people with the invitations would come to the showroom and just be shown a short film. This was held at a little place called Le Corona, which is a bar/tobacco shop in the first R&D Small. I know that many of you are tired of me saying this, but we gotta rehash it again for the people who are just starting out in the series. Margiela popularized guerrilla runway shows. It was the standard for most brands to show near the Louvre in the first R&D Small, all in the same place, these temporary tents that were set up near the Louvre. Margiela has always shown in very populous places, playgrounds, cafes, post offices, places like that. Having your own unique place to do a runway show is very common now, but it definitely wasn't back then. So in the early years of the brand, doing a runway show in the first R&D Small was a big no-no. It was a little bit too establishment. But Martin and the team did show in the first R&D Small back in spring 1998 with Ray Kawakubo at the Conciergerie, and just recently in spring 2001. The idea here is that I think they're inching closer to Margiela as a brand being part of the fashion establishment, which the facts back up. I mean, they're on the official calendar now. People want to go to it. They're very well known worldwide. Margiela is an established part of the fashion system. But to kind of get in touch with their roots, they are doing it in a showroom that is in the first R&D Small technically, but it is in the most populous place possible, which is just a grimy bar and tobacco shop. This is really interesting. The staff at the bar were the ones explaining the collection to the attendees when they were watching the short film, which is a very interesting relinquishment of control there. And actually something really interesting, the Bible. It tells us that the short film that was shown was 16 minutes long, but the only short films that I could find in reference to this season were 5 minutes long. I have checked with all of my connections, some of which are very good connections, and everyone just says that in their personal archives they only have a 5-minute video. So we'll work with what we got today. Just a minute, there's an event in Pokemon Go. I have to catch this. Yeah. Hey! For every second that you're not joining the Patreon, you're actively hurting my feelings. This is a passion project and I'm actually losing money on every episode I make of this. They take an enormous amount of time and effort. Also, if you're not on the Patreon, do you not want to see the full episodes? Like if you're working through this if you're working through the entire series, it makes sense that you would want to learn everything. I don't know, like the extended episode for this one, for example, is massive. Like most of the really good information, just the way that I format these, it ended up being in the Patreon exclusive part of the episode. Support independent fashion journalism, but also you just get a lot of good stuff with it. Patreon.com/BlissFoster. Just go, thank you. Go do that, please. Margiela asked a creative agency in London that's called Intro. Like the name of the agency is just Intro. They asked them to create a short film for the collection this season. Margiela didn't want to do a standard collection film. Standard obviously isn't really his thing, and it was Intro's job to find a way to make this thing really go off. As you can see, they crushed it. Intro got a house fitting model and filmed the collection in 16mm, then did some heavy editing and post-production. I'm not a pro with camera gear, but my understanding is that you would use 16mm in order to emphasize things that are in the foreground, the details of things in the foreground. So this ends up working out really well if you want to emphasize something like clothes. And speaking of clothes, we have an incredible variation on the idea of anonymity this season. It's one of those things where you could watch this entire short film on its own and possibly miss it. Throughout the history of Maison Martin Margiela, we've known about this idea of anonymity. It's obviously like one of the first things that you learn about the house, right? And it's been interesting to trace the history of how that anonymity gets expressed. Here, for the first time in this season, we have digital anonymity. And while that seems like a superficial approach to the theme, I assure you it is not. There's a concept that I learned about a long time ago in college when we had to read a book called Understanding Comics. So this book is actually, it's one of the best textbooks that I ever had. It's an academic text that talks about comics as an art form, but the whole thing is a comic book. Okay, so there's this great section where they talk about images, illustrations becoming more and more abstract. We look at the illustration on one end and it is very realistic, right? It could almost be a photograph. There's no mistaking at all that that is a human face. And as we move farther to the right in these illustrations, we lose detail very quickly, but our brains never stop saying, yes, that is a human face. But there's something else that's kind of happening subconsciously in our brains. The farther right in these illustrations that we go, the more our brains start to think that could be anyone's face. It could be said to represent more and more people the farther right we get. So the one on the far left that is photorealistic, that one is pretty much just one person's face. When we look at that, all of us look at it and say, yep, that's not me. But the more abstract the illustration becomes, even down to literally a circle, 2 dots, and a line, not only do we continue to say, yep, that's a human face, but the more it might possibly, in the right context, be our own face. So the post-production effects in this video take us to a similar place. Anonymity has been expressed in the past as exactly that, anonymity. There's clearly a woman walking there, and she is anonymous. We can't tell who she is. But because this is footage of an actual person walking, we don't get the same effect. It's just hiding the person's identity. But here, we not only have the identity of the people's faces covered, but we have also generalized them in the same way that we understand from this illustration. These are not simply a specific woman whose face is being hidden. This is approaching the every woman idea. Now, it's not full fidelity with the far right illustration here. This is still a tall, thin woman, for example. We can see a bit of her features, etc., but the principle here is still the same. By minimizing the personal facial features of the house model, we expound this out to encompass more people than just the one person. This is being used to say, these clothes are for you. I recently rediscovered an interview from The Guardian with Maison Margiela, and I think it's relevant here, though this technically happened before this collection came out. The interviewer is asking, if the models are secondary, why use glamorous ones? And they're just talking about their use of Kate Moss and other supermodels in their runway shows and still using the masks. The Maison said, quote, "For the majority of our collections, we believe it is opportune to focus on the combined forces of the physical presence of women of many ages and backgrounds," end quote. And this here is a great example of the combined forces of the physical presence of many women. It's a composite, but it's not condescending. This is not an oversimplification or a stereotype of women. And in a lot of ways, go with me here, please. This is a lot like the classic iPod commercials, one of the most memorable advertising campaigns of all time. It is important to point out that these iPod commercials came out after this collection, so this was not some kind of copy. By minimizing the details of their personal features, you are just left with a person. And it's a good chance that among the 5 or 6 people shown in the iPod commercial, that one of them reminds you of yourself. And they're in this wonderful, abstract environment with this object. The vagueness of everything other than the object sort of tricks your brain into thinking that this object is not just useful or well designed. The object is part of yourself. The object is you. Now there is a cynical side of us that can hear what I just said and say, that is bullshit. When advertisers are really brilliant and that brilliance gets explained, it can often feel very threatening. We don't like to think that our emotions and our conscious brains are being manipulated, especially when that manipulation is compelling us to buy expensive electronics or to shop at Target. I get that. But I don't feel like there's a lot of manipulation here. Again, this isn't an advertisement. This wasn't aired publicly. And unlike advertisements that employ similar techniques, I think the Maison's film stands apart because it's honest. Like when Margiela says, hey, this is for you. It's a really special object, and I think that if you gave it a shot, it could occupy a special part of your life. I tend to believe him. I mean, it's one thing if Apple is shoving some electronics down our throat, but it's a really different thing if a fashion house that might as well be categorized as an art collective is taking the less profitable route at almost every single turn and making many of these products by hand in their Parisian studio. This short film is a great way of framing that in a really subtle way, and honestly, I think it's pretty beautiful. Okay, so let's wind it back here. As is often the case at the Maison, they set up parameters for themselves to guide the creation of the collection. Here there were actually 3 different categories of parameters: cuts, circles, and folds. Folds is the super crazy one. This shit is nuts. The results of this self-imposed challenge are really crazy. I hadn't heard about anything actually from this collection prior to researching for this series, and I am so glad I know about it now. Especially the folded clothes. Like, I'm not trying to overhype it, but we basically have origami clothes. It's so crazy. As always, we are going to explore the nuances and details of those clothes in the extended episode, which is only available on Patreon. If you haven't already, go sign up using the link that is on your screen now. Just click it. It takes 30 seconds to sign up. Really all you're giving me is just a few bucks a month, and then you get a ton of perks. You get early episodes, you get extended episodes of the Margiela series, and a few other episodes have extended versions. You get exclusive episodes like the interviews that I do with designers. The full unedited interview is always available on the Patreon. And you get access to the private Discord server, which is the greatest fashion community on the internet. I love you a lot, friends. It really does mean a ton to me that you've stuck with me through this entire series. I honestly assumed that by this point in the series, I would be putting this out to the 15 people that still cared about it. And these videos don't get nearly as many views as my regular videos on the channel, but there are way more of you than I ever thought there would be, and I'm really grateful for it. So thank you for sticking with me. Talk to you soon. Love you. Peace.